Right. Let's begin. Title of this episode is Argentina cries for Milei, the Peso plunge after primary polls, right? And let's start this way. I guess it's interesting if we begin in this way. For those that have parachuted into this episode out of sheer curiosity, who is the name I put on the episode's title? Who is Javier Milei? Because that is central to understand what I'm going to be talking about ahead. So again, who is Javier Milei? Well, in truth, there are many versions of this man. The Telegraph I read called him a hard right rock singer and a tantric sex instructor. Yes. Another local political establishment in Argentina called him a daytime television buffoon, which is crazy. But he's also had a career as a chief economist and financial advisor for many firms and public bodies like the HSBC in New York, the B20 for the ICC. Politically, he is a national deputy in Buenos Aires as leader of this party called La Libertad Avanza, and now he is leading the primaries to become Argentina's next big president, which is revolutionary in many, many ways, and we're going to discuss more on that later on. Namely, his plans on monetary policy, which are very much unique. It's a model that's not being practiced anywhere else in the world today, so stay tuned for that. But first, to warm up the palate, let's look at the polls in Argentina. Bear in mind, this podcast is not based in the realms of politics. I'll try to keep it short on that premise. But let's look at the polls for the three leading parties. And we will see here a slight but relevant lead of Milei's party. He got 30% approval. Bear in mind, he is the only candidate for this party. So he's taking all 30% of those votes. That's followed closely by Juntos por el Cambio with 28% votings, out of which 17% were allocated to the leading candidate, Patricia Bullrich. And in third place is the current incumbent party of Argentina, Unión por la Patria. They got 27% of the remaining votes, out of which Sergio Massa got 21.5% of those votes, right? But now let's look at this next infographic. It's a map comparing the primary electoral results from 2019 and 2023, right? You can see it by region. And in 2019, you see there's no sign of Milei's party, which is the purple colored one. It's completely regionally dominated by Unión por la Patria, the current party, which, from what I see here, only the states of Córdoba and the capital of Buenos Aires rebelled against this and voted majority for Juntos por el Cambio. The thing is, look now at the 2023 map instead. The only increase you will see there from Juntos por el Cambio or Unión por la Patria, from what I can see from my eye, is in the small state of Buenos Aires, because that went from 44% to 48%. But the rest of the map has been completely taken over by Libertad Avanza. And even the regions that haven't have seen their main party's percentage decreased. And that is influence, if you ever saw one. Which is crazy. And even in Buenos Aires, if you want to look at it specifically in Buenos Aires, sure, look at it, the individuals that got voted for. And you'll see that, yes, both of the candidates for Juntos got majority voting, so Patricia with 28, Horacio Larreta with 20, but the third most voted man was not from the incumbent party of Unión por la Patria. It was from Javier Milei. He got 18% of the votes, while Sergio Massa only got 16.5%. So you can see that he still has influence, even in Buenos Aires, where Juntos leads in terms of general votes. Now let's move on to what I want to speak about in this episode. Who is this man exactly? How could he revolutionize Argentina with his ideas? And why is he so controversial? He's labeled as this radical, right? So let's dig into that. I've mentioned he's a liberal libertarian. So he's from the Austrian school of thought, a follower of von Mises and Milton Friedman. But his offers are still very unique. Philosophically, he is the sort of market capitalist anarchist. He's a believer of spontaneous order, a minarchist, in essence. I think that's a good word to describe him. That would be otherwise called a night watchman state advocate, for those that sort of know what I'm talking about. He is considered radical mostly for his views in terms of the absolute freedom of the man. And I mean this for everything. I read an article, an opposition article, I'd assume, writing he wanted to legalize organ trades. To that extent, you know. And then this is another funny example I found. Although he was prohibited by this famous Argentine rock band to play their own songs, but he blasted their greatest hits called Se Viene in the celebrations after winning these primaries. And the chorus, by the way, of the song said, "An explosion is coming." So he knows what he's doing. That was pretty fun. I like his aura in that regard. But then he also kind of contradicts himself sometimes when looking at the laws of abortion and his absolute freedom stance, right? Maybe I'm just misinterpreting it, but he's more conservative, definitely in that sense. Also know that he's dubious on climate change, vaccinations, sex education in school. So many people see him as a Trumpist in that regard. But we move forward now. I want to learn everything economics about this man. I've read some of his articles and lectures, and it interests me. I like it. Doesn't mean I agree with everything he says, but it's interesting to see the way he thinks because it's so different from what I've been accustomed to in Argentina, right? Of for the last 50, 60 years, right? Peronismo, Kirchnerismo. How can I define Peronismo for those that don't know? Out of the blue. Well, it's this flagship Argentine ideology. I don't know how to define it correctly. It's a vague blend of nationalism, laborism, populism, but it's not at all linked to either communism or capitalism. So it's a bit in the middle, center left. I don't know how to explain. But Javier Milei is there to stop Peronismo once and for all in Argentina. So let's start by reading his Plano de Gobierno, his manifesto. I have here the first point is related to his state reforms. Are you ready for this? Now I'm going to read this in Spanish, translate to you guys in English, so bear with me. He says, the Argentine state is the principal cause of impoverishment to its people, not just because of its sheer elephantine size, but also because of the state's function, because of the tangle of regulations that come out of each state department. And down below he says, the state's function is to protect the fundamental rights of life, liberty, and an individual's property. That's a classic statement from someone from the right. Right? Now he goes on to propose the abolishment of all state ministries, bar the 6 ministries. So the Ministry of the Economy, Justice, Interior, Security, Defense, Foreign Relations, and Infrastructure. So 7 ministries. All the other 11 ministries that are still existing in Argentina today can be waved goodbye if this man gets the office. And by the way, he's going to create an 8th ministry as well called the Ministry of Human Capital. Now this is just a scratch out of his state reform, but let's move on to his economic reforms of things. First, he wants to drastically reduce public spending to reduce taxes for the people. Again, standard claim. And what caught my eye here, though, is he wants to shadow Chile's commercial exposure to the world of a more free market ordeal. Essentially, his goal is to expose Argentine companies to global markets and Argentine consumers to global products from abroad without having to the troubles of the bureaucrats that are so prevalent in Argentina today. He claims commercial isolation for the country is one of the leading factors for the country's inflationary disorders. Now, this is all fun and games, but there's this one reform linked to monetary policy that I think most people find the craziest, or at least most heretical out of this man. He plans to abolish the Central Bank of Argentina. Yes, the emitter of the Argentine peso. And this only means one thing, right? Milei wants to dollarize the country. That's what we would think. To, I quote, eliminate inflation forever. And he says there's no better way of doing this than to remove the central bank's ability to emit currency. There you go. Actually, I don't even think, from what I'm reading here, I don't even think he's fixating on the dollarization part. He is proposing to the people of Argentina that they can transact in whatever worldwide currency they see fit. And this includes Bitcoin too. And I think it's interesting because no other country in the world has ever done this, at least in contemporary times. And when you look at the Argentine peso's performance as of late, I mean, 3 digits inflation across the board. And you think to yourself, maybe, just maybe it's worth a shot. There are a series of disadvantages for not having your own currency, but just maybe it's worth a shot for this country. Now, where does he take his basis from? Whoa, where has this idea propped up from? It's from this book called Dollarization as a Solution for Argentina. It was written by the Argentine economist Emilio Ocampo and a professor, he's based in Texas, I believe, called Nicolas Kashanovsky. In fact, these authors are actively involved in Milei's team as of now. And I've heard about Kashanovsky before, and I can link some of his more technical reports on the matter in the description down below because I'd be damned to go into that much detail right now. What I can do in the meantime is highlight some of the main points to get you guys thinking as well. So starting in the origins of Milei's belief of monetary policy, he defends that a freedom to choose currency has been a norm for all of humanity's existence. Since primordial times we're talking. Money evolves and many materials have been used as money, right? Silver and gold probably gained the most preponderance throughout. But many sovereign emperors or sultans in history have tried to use their minting monopolies to certify a particular monetary standard for their populace. But some of these foreign sovereigns weren't necessarily able to impose a single currency that they liked to their populations. And there are vivid examples of this, like Diocletian in the Roman Empire. He wanted to impose a new coinage system, and he had a lot of resistance. He was barred completely by the communities, and this extended to the Holy Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, Chinese dynasties, many examples of this. And here's where the Austrian school comes to terms with this historical fact. To resist minting monopolies from governments, especially in the last 100 to 200 years, central banks have sort of arrogated themselves to monopolizing a country's emission of currency, namely in those countries with fewer checks and balances, lower levels of institutionalization and control. That's where it gets worrying the most. So Milei would argue that control of central banks on money supply and money management is the source of all the excessive public spending that has ruined most of Latin America and again Argentina in the last 50 to 60 years. Now, I personally see this as quite an exaggerated belief. If anything, I would accept the idea of making the central bank independent, but what Milei says, he sticks by, and that's all that matters. And the truth is, in my case too, I lived in Argentina, right? And I saw the way my parents financed themselves there. Individuals are already dollarizing the economy on their own. I'd stretch a limb to confess that Argentina has already been dollarized in a de facto way. One transaction and one contract at a time. Companies like Mercado Libre, which is a leading tech company in Argentina, they are increasingly acquiescent to the dollar. Most landlords in Buenos Aires now only accept payments in dollars too. We paid in dollars when we lived there. Dito for Airbnb rentals as well. The list is endless. I mean, musical instruments, divorce lawyers, imported leathers, whatever. If you want this stuff, you gotta pay in the greenbacks. This fall for the peso is a classic breakdown of fiat currencies, just like we witnessed in Venezuela not too long ago. But while most people are getting paid in dollars, secretly or not, especially those in wealthier circles as well, Argentinians, or the Argentine people, are still nervous about openly talking about this, out of fear of retribution from tax authorities. Except, of course, Milei and his advisors, they can't stop talking about this. So, for my own conclusion, I still think abolishing the central bank is risky. Definitely, it's a call for no exit strategy from them. I believe it would lead to a huge contraction and possibly a crash. And I still think this option is not a silver bullet. There's no silver bullet in Argentina, to be frank, that can solve the country's existing problems. Only hard work. I'd agree with what some IMF economists say as well. They probably also say hard work is the only solution. But I kind of agree with Argentina's case. Argentina has been mismanaged for too long. Excess domestic savings financed by the central bank, large-scale external borrowings. All of this is unsustainable, which causes serial defaults. And when you look at Argentina's experiences when they are dollarizing back in the 90s, you should take that as a serious cautionary tale for them. Because in convertibility plans like these, when the dollar becomes strong, for example, or commodity prices plummet, there's nothing you can do if you're dollarized. Argentina could lose all its external competitiveness for all that the US cares. They're reliant on the Fed. Growth could literally fall with whatever the Fed decides. So to close off, I suggest rigid and competitive banking systems in Argentina before turning completely to the dollar. That's just me. There was a critic I found online. He said this, an excellent way to finish this episode. The Argentine people deserve more than just excellence on the football pitch. That sums it up. So this was Nuno Gomes for the Academic Observer on Economics, Business, and Finance. Let me know what you thought about this. You can contact me and get in touch through all of my socials. But thank you once again.